Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Today we are going deep, really deep.
We are. I want you to just, for a second, imagine the world in the 12th century. The year is 1165. The map is basically on fire.
Right.
You have the Crusades just tearing the Middle East apart. You've got the cross and the crescent locked in this desperate, bloody struggle. Borders are shifting like sand in a storm.
Safety is a complete myth. There's no such thing.
And yet, in the middle of this absolute geopolitical chaos, one man from Navarre, a guy named Benjamin of Tudela, decides to pack his bags. He isn't a soldier, he's not a king, he's just a curious observer.
A very curious observer.
And over 13 years, he walks from Spain to the borders of China, documenting everything: trade, danger, and the strange, diverse beliefs of humanity.
It's a travelogue of the Middle Ages that just reveals how connected the world really was, even when it looked like it was falling apart.
It is the ultimate counter-narrative to the idea of the Dark Ages.
Oh, absolutely.
So the source we're looking at is the Itinerary of Benjamin of Tudela. We're using the Marcus Nathan Adler translation, which is great because Adler is not afraid to, call out where Benjamin might be listening to a bit too much gossip.
He has some very critical footnotes, which are almost as interesting as the main text.
They are. But before we get to the flying griffins and the wind worshippers, and believe me, we will get there, we need to situate ourselves. 1165 to 1173 AD. Why does this specific window of time matter so much?
It matters because it's a moment of, well, it's like a held breath in history.
Yeah.
The Second Crusade has failed spectacularly.
Right.
The Third Crusade, the famous one with Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, that hasn't happened yet. The Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem exists, but it is so fragile. It's an island in a sea of changing Islamic power.
So it's incredibly volatile.
Beyond volatile.
Right.
The Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt is collapsing. The Seljuk Turks are rising. If you're a traveler, you are basically walking through a minefield of shifting alliances and simmering conflicts.
Which brings us to the big question. Why? Why would you go? Why leave Tudela? Tudela's nice. It's in Navarre, northern Spain. Why risk your life walking to Baghdad?
That is the mystery at the heart of the entire text. Benjamin never, not once, explicitly says, I am leaving because of X.
He gives no mission statement.
None. So Adler and other historians have been debating this for a century, but the text itself gives us clues. It's obsessed with two things: commerce and demographics.
He counts people. Everywhere he goes, he's counting Jewish people.
He does. Here are 40 Jews, here are 500, here are 3,000, and he lists their professions.
Okay.
These are glassmakers, these are dyers. This leads to one of the main theories, that he might have been a census taker.
For whom?
Well, perhaps for the community itself, or maybe he's scouting for asylum. You have to remember, life for Jews in Europe was becoming increasingly precarious. The Crusades often started with, massacres of Jewish communities in the Rhineland.
So he might be mapping out escape routes.
It's very possible. He could be looking for a safe harbor, mapping out where exiles could run if the walls finally closed in. It's like a feasibility study for survival.
That makes a lot of sense. But there's the other angle.
The merchant angle, yes. He notes the coral trade, the spice routes, the manufacturing centers. He creates this dossier of economic opportunity. If you were a merchant in Navarre, Benjamin's book was essentially the Bloomberg terminal of the 12th century.
I like that. It told you who to trust, where the money was,
and which roads would get you killed. Very important information.
Let's talk about those roads. He starts in Spain, Tudela, Zaragoza, Tarragona, and then Barcelona. And right away, the image I had of this era, mud, huts, and misery, it just gets complicated. He describes Barcelona as a global hub.
Where men come for business from all quarters. That's his phrase. And he lists the nations: Greeks, Pisans, Genoese, Sicilians, Egyptians, people from Israel. Barcelona wasn't some backwater. It was a major intersection. And what strikes me is that despite the massive religious wars dominating the headlines of history, trade was the engine that just kept running. Money doesn't really care about the Pope or the Caliph,
Right, it just flows.
It just flows.
He moves into southern France, Montpellier, Lunel. And here, the tone of his writing changes. He stops talking about merchandise as much and starts talking about mines. He describes Lunel as this intense academic fortress.
This is so crucial. We often think of the intellectual history of the West as being strictly, Christian monasticism at this point. But Benjamin reveals this whole parallel network.
A Jewish intellectual network.
Yes. In Lunel, he finds a community dedicated entirely to study. He mentions scholars who teach students from all over the world, providing them with food and lodging that's all funded by the local community. It's basically a university system, privately funded, operating completely outside the feudal structure.
And he singles out one guy, Rabbi Asher, the recluse.
Yes, the recluse.
He says Asher focuses only on study, abstains from meat, and just dwells apart from the world. This sounds almost like a Christian monk, but it's a Jewish scholar.
It shows that the ascetic impulse, that desire to withdraw from the world, to find truth, it wasn't unique to Christianity at all. It was a shared medieval value. But notice the contrast.
What's that?
Benjamin admires the recluse. He writes about him with respect. But Benjamin himself is the complete opposite. He's engaging with the world. He's moving from the quiet study hall of Lunel to the bustling, dangerous ports of Marseille and Genoa.
And Genoa sounds terrifying. I mean, he says the Genoese have towers in their houses and literally fight each other from the rooftops.
It's domestic warfare. Genoa was a maritime republic, incredibly wealthy, but politically just. A tinderbox. Families would build these vertical fortresses inside the city walls. If you had a problem with your neighbor, you didn't call the police.
You shot a crossbow bolt from your bedroom window.
Exactly. Chaos at home, but incredible efficiency abroad. He says they're masters of the sea.
It's a common paradox, isn't it?
It really is.
Okay, so let's move him down the boot of Italy to Rome. This is the big one. Rome is the head of Christendom. The Pope is there. The Crusades are sanctioned from this very city. You would expect Benjamin, a Jew from Spain, to be walking right into the lion's den.
You'd think so.
But the vibe he describes in Rome is, well, it's surprisingly chill.
It's more than chill. It's integrated. This is honestly one of the most surprising parts of the entire itinerary. He arrives in Rome, he sees the great buildings, but then he starts talking about the Pope's administration. He mentioned Pope Alexander, and he just drops this detail.
The big one.
The Pope's steward, the man who manages the Pope's house and all his finances, is a Jew named Rabbi Jekiel.
Wait. Let's just unpack that for a second. The Pope, the spiritual leader of the Crusades against the infidels, has a Jewish chief financial officer.
Essentially, yes. Benjamin called him a handsome young man of intelligence and wisdom who has free entry to the Pope's palace. This just completely disrupts the standard narrative of Christians versus Jews in the Middle Ages.
Why would the Pope do that? What's the logic there?
It's pragmatism, pure and simple. Jewish administrators were often seen as politically neutral. If you hire a noble from a rival Italian family, they might try to undermine you to gain power for their own family.
Right, they have skin in the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A Jewish steward had no dog in the fight for the papal throne. His safety, his position, his entire life relied entirely on the Pope's protection. It created this bond of loyalty that was actually harder to find among the Christian aristocracy.
That's fascinating. Okay, so Benjamin also does a lot of sightseeing in Rome, but his tour guide must have been telling him some tall tales, or maybe Benjamin is just remixing history. He sees St. Peter's, but then he starts describing these statues in a very specific way.
This is where we see what you could call counter-history. It's brilliant. He describes a bronze statue, and he calls it Samson. He sees another one and calls it Absalom, the son of King David.
But they weren't, right? Art historians would say.
Art historians would tell us these are almost certainly statues of Hercules or some Roman emperors. But Benjamin, and more importantly, the Roman Jewish community, they have renamed them. They've co-opted them.
They're claiming the city's landmarks for themselves.
Exactly. They are looking at the monuments of their conquerors. You have to remember, Rome destroyed Jerusalem, and they are writing their own ancestors into the stone. That's not a Roman god. That's our Samson. It's a way of surviving psychologically in a city that was literally built on your destruction.
He does something similar with the Solomon artifacts. He goes to the Church of St. John Lateran, and he says there are 2 bronze columns there from the temple in Jerusalem, and he says they sweat.
Exude moisture is his phrase. He claims that every single year on the 9th of Ab, which is the anniversary of the temple's destruction, these columns get wet. It's such a powerful metaphor. Even the plunder, even the bronze stolen by the Emperor Titus, remembers the tragedy. It weeps. Benjamin is walking through Rome, the center of Christian power, but he is seeing a map of Jewish grief and resilience just overlaid on top of the streets.
And he also mentions a cave by the Tiber River where the temple vessels are hidden. It feels like he's saying, Rome has the shell, but we have the secret.
That is a recurring theme throughout the entire book. The visible world belongs to the empires, to the popes, and the caliphs. But the hidden truth, the real story, belongs to the exiles.
So he leaves Italy, he crosses the Adriatic, and he enters the Byzantine Empire. He heads to Constantinople. And if Rome was all about history and grief, Constantinople is about one thing.
Money.
Serious money.
Oh, yes. The wealth he describes is just staggering.
He talks about the Hagia Sophia. He says the pillars are made of gold and silver. He says the wealth is beyond telling. But the description of the emperor's palace, the Palace of Blachernae, is it's ridiculous. The throne with the crown suspended on golden chains.
It's a famous image from many accounts of the period. The crown was either too heavy to wear, or maybe the symbolism was that the emperor sits under a higher authority, not just possessing it himself. But Benjamin, he focuses on the jewels. He says they shine so bright that at night you don't even need lamps.
It sounds like a fairy tale. I mean, is he exaggerating?
Probably, but it conveys the overwhelming impression the Byzantine court made on visitors. It was designed to shock and awe you into submission.
Yeah.
But Benjamin is sharp. He's very sharp. He doesn't just look at the shiny stuff.
Right.
He looks at who is holding the sword, and he notices a massive, fatal flaw in the entire Byzantine system.
The mercenaries.
The mercenaries. He writes that the Greeks hire men from amongst all nations, whom they call barbarians, to fight their wars for them. And then he gives this incredibly damning observation. He explicitly says the Greeks are like women who have no strength to fight.
Okay, that's a seriously sexist 12th century burn, but what's the geopolitical insight there?
It's the diagnosis of a dying empire. Simple as that. An empire that outsources its violence is an empire that has lost its core. They have all the gold in the world, but they have to pay Franks, Varangians, and Turks to protect it.
So he's basically predicting the fall.
In a way, yes. He sees that money without martial spirit is just a buffet waiting for a predator to come along.
And he also sees the rot in how they treat their minorities. He talks about the paraquarter. This is not the handsome steward of the Pope situation we saw in Rome.
Not at all. It's the complete opposite. In Constantinople, the Jews are segregated. They live across the water in a district called Pera. And Benjamin describes the tanners.
Why is it that tanners are always the bad neighbors in history?
Because tanning leather involves urine, feces, and rotting flesh. It smells horrific. It's a necessary but disgusting job. And the Byzantines forced the tanners to live next to the Jewish quarter and dump their dirty water into their streets.
That's deliberate.
It's environmental warfare, a way to constantly degrade and humiliate a population. Benjamin says the Greeks hate the Jews, good and bad alike.
But then he adds a twist. He says, the Jews are rich, good, and charitable.
He emphasizes their moral superiority in the face of this physical degradation. They are treated like filth, but they act like nobility. It's a very defensive, very proud posture he takes.
So he leaves the Golden City with its smell of tanning fluid, and he heads south. He island hops Rhodes, Cyprus, and he lands in Antioch. Now we are in the Crusader states. We're in the war zone.
This is where the narrative really gets tense. He is walking down the coast of modern-day Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Israel. He visits Tyre. He talks about the glass industry, which Tyre was famous for, and the sugar plantations.
Sugar was basically the oil of the Middle Ages, wasn't it?
It is a massive cash crop. The Arabs introduced it, and the Crusaders really capitalized on it. But as he travels through this region, we start to encounter what you wanted to focus on, the beliefs that are way outside the norm, the theological Wild West.
The assassins.
The Hashishim, yes.
I always thought the stories about the assassins were, exaggerated by Marco Polo much later on. But Benjamin is writing this in the 1160s. He's one of the first Westerners to report on them.
He is. And his description, though brief, captures the essence of their reputation perfectly. He locates them in the mountains of Lebanon. He says they follow the old man of the mountain. And he notes, very specifically, that they do not follow the law of Islam. They have their own separate prophet.
And the loyalty, that's the part that's so chilling. He says they follow the old man's commands to the death.
Whether for death or for life. That's the quote. The terrifying thing about the assassins wasn't their military power. They were a relatively small sect. It was their psychology.
The sleeper agent idea.
Exactly. The idea that an agent could be in your court, totally integrated for years, just waiting for a word to kill you, even if it meant his own certain death. That level of fanaticism was a new kind of weapon. And Benjamin spots this radical belief system immediately.
Then, just down the road, he meets the Druze. And his description of the Druze is, well, it's just trippy.
It is. He calls them godless. Now, we have to be careful with that word.
Right. It doesn't mean atheist.
To a medieval monotheist like Benjamin, godless often just means your theology is so alien I can't even categorize it. He says they dwell on the cliffs and have no king. But then he explains their belief in the transmigration of souls.
Reincarnation.
He says, and I'm quoting here, they say that the soul of a good man passes into the body of a little child, and the soul of a bad man passes into a dog or an ass.
That is a very specific karmic worldview, and he mentions the incest thing. Fathers marrying their own daughters.
That is likely a slander or a misunderstanding of their insular endogamy, marrying within the tribe. Outsiders often accuse secretive mountain-dwelling sects of incest. There's a common trope. But the key point Benjamin makes is about alliance. He says, they are friendly towards the Jews.
Why would they be?
Because they shared a common enemy. The Druze were persecuted by Orthodox Islam, and they were very wary of the Christians. The Jews were a minority everywhere. So in the mountains, the godless reincarnationists and the Orthodox Jews found common ground in trade and mutual survival.
It shows that theology often takes a backseat to strategic partnership.
It almost always does.
He moves south to Jerusalem, the center of the world. At this point, it's a Frankish city. It's small, heavily fortified.
The garrison town, really. He sees the military orders everywhere. The Hospitallers with 400 knights who are also treating the sick. The Templars with 300 knights quartered in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which he calls Solomon's Palace. You get the sense of a city that is just armed to the teeth.
He visits the Western Wall, what he calls the Gate of Mercy. But I want to talk about Hebron, the Cave of Machpelah, the Tomb of the Patriarchs. This is one of the best investigative moments in the entire book.
It's the fake tomb scandal of the 12th century.
Break it down for us.
So Hebron is a major pilgrimage site for Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Everyone wants to see the grave of Abraham. Benjamin reports that the Gentiles, the Crusaders who are running the site, have built 6 tombs on the surface level. And they've labeled them Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah.
A sort of holy theme park attraction.
Exactly. Step right up, see the tomb. Pilgrims pay their money, they pray at the fake tomb, they buy a souvenir, and they leave. But.
There's a but.
There's a but. Benjamin says that if a Jew comes and pays a special reward, let's call it what it is, it's a bribe to the custodian, an iron gate is opened.
The velvet rope drops, you get into the VIP section.
You go down into the actual cave system. The first cave is empty. The second cave is also empty. Then you get to the third cave, and that's the real deal. He describes 6 sepulchers and tubs filled with bones.
Tubs of bones.
He says people brought the bones of their ancestors to be stored there, in this holy place. It's this visceral, dusty, bone-filled reality that exists just beneath the sanitized tourist trap on the surface.
He's telling his readers, don't be fooled by the surface.
The truth is expensive, and it's usually underground, which is basically the motto for this whole deep dive.
It really is.
It is.
Okay, let's leave the Crusader states. He travels to Damascus, which he loves, by the way. He calls it a paradise of water and gardens. And then he crosses the desert to the big one, Baghdad, the heart of the caliphate.
This is the shock to the system.
Yeah.
You have to remember, coming from Europe, or even from the war-torn Levant, Baghdad in the 12th century was like landing on another planet. It was the absolute peak of the Islamic Golden Age. Science, medicine, astronomy, philosophy.
And Benjamin is a complete fanboy. He loves the caliph. He compares him to the Pope, but honestly, he makes the caliph sound way better.
He calls the Abbasid caliph the Emir al-Mu'minin, the commander of the faithful. He describes him as a man who is kind unto Israel, who reads the Torah and knows Hebrew.
Now, is that true? Did the caliph actually know Hebrew?
It's possible he knew some as a learned man, but it's more likely Benjamin is projecting the benevolent king archetype onto him. But the detail that rings true is the caliph's work ethic. Benjamin says the caliph lives by the labor of his own hands.
What does he do?
He makes coverlets blankets, stamps them with his seal, and his officers sell them in the market. The proceeds pay for his entire upkeep.
The philosopher king who doesn't leech off the taxpayer.
Compare that with the Byzantine Emperor and his gold-chain throne. The caliph is presented as pious, humble, and spiritually pure. He only appears in public once a year during Ramadan.
And that procession scene is incredible.
He rides a mule, not a war horse. He wears black garments to signify modesty. The crowds are screaming just to see the light of his countenance, and he lowers the hem of his robe from a palace window so they can kiss it. It's this amazing mix of extreme humility and absolute godlike reverence.
But the part of Baghdad that really, really blew my mind was the medical system. He calls it the Dar al-Maristan.
The House of Healing. Benjamin describes this massive complex. It's essentially a city for the sick. He says there are 60 medical warehouses full of spices and remedies, but the key is the funding. The caliph pays for everything. The patients are kept there until they are fully recovered.
And he specifically mentions the insane.
This is so significant. In Europe at this time, mental illness was often treated with exorcism or just chaining someone in a cellar. In Baghdad, Benjamin describes a ward where the mentally ill are kept in chains, yes, but they are fed and cared for, and they're examined every month by royal physicians to see if they have regained their reason.
And if they have.
Once they are deemed sane, they are released and given money from the caliph's treasury to restart their lives. It's a proto-welfare state combined with social medicine. It's centuries ahead of its time.
Okay, we absolutely need to talk about the exilarch. Benjamin spends a lot of time on this guy. Daniel, the son of Hisdai. Who or what is the exilarch?
The Rosh Galuta, it means head of the captivity. This is a fascinating political institution that existed for over 1,000 years. The exilarch was the secular leader of the entire Jewish community in the East, and he claimed direct descent from King David.
So he's Jewish royalty.
He is Jewish royalty, and the caliph officially recognized him as such. Benjamin says the exilarch has a seal of authority that comes from the tradition of Muhammad himself. When the exilarch goes to visit the caliph, he rides with horsemen and heralds shouting, "Make way for our Lord, the son of David."
That is a massive power move in the middle of Baghdad.
It gets better. The caliph rises to greet him and places him on a throne opposite his own. It validates the Jewish community as a legitimate state within a state. But it wasn't just ceremonial. Benjamin mentions the 100 stripes.
Right. Everyone, whether he be Jew or Mohammedan, must rise up before him or receive 100 stripes.
Just think about that. That is the state monopoly on violence being delegated to a minority leader. If a Muslim didn't show respect and stand up for the Jewish exilarch, that Muslim could be flogged by the exilarch's men.
That level of authority is it's staggering.
It is. It shows that the caliphate operated on a system of, you could call it corporate federalism. Communities policed themselves and respected each other's leaders, and the whole system was enforced by the central sword of the caliph.
It really does sound like a golden age for the Jews in Baghdad.
In Benjamin's telling, absolutely. 10 great academies, thousands of students, a prince of the captivity treated like a king. It's the perfect counterweight to the suffering and persecution he sees back in Europe.
So Benjamin leaves the safety and splendor of Baghdad and he heads east into what you call the Wild East, Persia, the ruins of Babylon and beyond. This is where the stories get stranger and the theology gets, well, darker and more complex.
He goes to the ruins of Babylon. He describes the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, but he says no one goes inside because it's full of serpents and scorpions. It's a cursed, haunted place.
But then he goes to Ezekiel's tomb, and this place is like the Switzerland of the ancient world.
It's a sanctuary. It's a neutral zone. Benjamin claims that even when armies are at war, if they pass by Ezekiel's tomb, they don't loot it, they don't touch it. It's a holy ground protected by the sheer weight of its own sanctity.
And he says there's a library there.
A massive library. He claims it has books from the First and Second Temple periods.
I just want to know where those books are now.
Lost to history, most likely. But for Benjamin, it was a living connection to the prophets, a tangible link to the past.
The story that really feels like a movie script, though, is the coffin of Daniel in the city of Susa.
Ah, yes. The tug of war for the prophet's bones. It's a fantastic story.
It set the scene for us.
Okay, so Susa is a city divided by a river. The Jews on one side of the river are wealthy. The Jews on the other side are poor. The wealthy side happens to have the coffin of Daniel the prophet in their marketplace.
And the poor side gets jealous.
The poor side decides, the only reason we're poor is because we don't have the coffin. It brings luck and prosperity.
It's a resource curse, but with a holy relic.
Exactly. So they start fighting. Actual wars break out between the two Jewish communities on opposite sides of the river over who gets the bones. Finally, they reach a compromise.
What's the deal?
They will swap the coffin every year. 1 year on the East Bank, the next year on the West Bank.
Which sounds exhausting for everyone involved, especially the coffin.
And, a bit disrespectful. And this is where the king of Persia comes in, the Shah bin Shah. He visits the city, he sees them dragging this holy relic back and forth across the bridge, and he says, this is shameful. This is not how you treat a prophet.
So what's his solution?
It's a brilliant feat of engineering and diplomacy. He commands them to measure the bridge over the river, find the exact center point, and suspend the coffin from the middle of the bridge in a crystal casket, reinforced with iron chains.
So Daniel is just hovering over the water.
Hovering over the water, belonging to neither side and therefore belonging to both. And Benjamin adds this amazing detail. Out of respect, The king commands that no one can fish in the river for a mile upstream or a mile downstream. The fish become sacred because they swim in Daniel's shadow.
That is a beautiful metaphor for conflict resolution. If you can't share it, suspend it in the middle where no one can touch it.
It's also a commentary on the danger of fetishizing relics. The fighting only stopped when the object of veneration was placed completely out of reach.
Now, we need to get into the really deep dive territory. Our listeners asked for the godless stuff, and Benjamin delivers with the godless tribes, the Gus.
The Kafar al-Turak. They were likely the Oghuz Turks, or a related nomadic group from the steppes. Benjamin describes them as living in the wilderness, eating uncooked meat, and having no wine or bread. A very rustic lifestyle.
And he says they worship the wind.
This is fascinating. He's almost certainly describing a form of shamanism, or Tengrism, the worship of the sky and spirit forces of nature. To a strict monotheist like Benjamin, seeing people pray to the wind was just baffling. So he calls them godless, meaning they have no organized scriptural religion that he can recognize.
He also says they have no noses.
Just two small holes in their face.
Okay, I assume that's a racist caricature.
It's likely a distortion of the Mongol or Turkic facial features, flatter noses than the Semitic or European standard, exaggerated by fear and legend. But here's the kicker. Despite being noseless, raw meat-eating wind worshippers, Benjamin says.
What?
They are in alliance with the Jews.
Again with the strange alliances.
It's the theme of the book. He tells a story about how the Jews living in the mountains showed the Gus a secret path to ambush the Persian king. It just reinforces that theme over and over. Survival trumps theology. You don't have to believe in the same God to fight the same king.
Speaking of fighting kings, we have to talk about the false messiah, David Alroy. This section of the book is wild. It's like a true crime podcast episode was just inserted into the middle of a travel guide.
It really is. David Alroy. This was a major event in the 12th century. Alroy was from Ahmadiyya in Kurdistan. He was a brilliant scholar. He studied in Baghdad at those great academies we mentioned earlier. He knew the law. He knew the mystics. And then one day, he decided to start a revolution.
He claimed to be the Messiah.
He did. He rebelled against the king of Persia. He told the Jews of the region, "The time of redemption has come. I will gather you all and lead you to Jerusalem."
And people actually believed him.
Desperation is a powerful drug. If you are living under the thumb of a foreign power, and this charismatic, incredibly educated leader shows up and says, "I have the power to save you," you listen. And Benjamin says Alroy used magic to convince them.
What kind of magic are we talking about?
Well, Benjamin recounts the legends. The king captures Alroy and throws him in prison. 3 days later, Alroy just walks into the king's throne room, completely free. The king shouts, "Seize him!" But the guards say, "We can't see him. We can only hear his voice."
An invisibility cloak.
Classic folklore trickster stuff. Then Alroy goes to the river, spreads his shawl on the water, and just walks across it. The king's servants try to follow in a boat, and they all drown.
This sounds like Jesus meets David Copperfield.
It was likely a highly effective guerrilla warfare campaign that got mythologized over time. Guerrilla tactics often look like magic to a conventional standing army, but the promise Alroy made was ultimately fatal. He told his followers to prepare to fly to Jerusalem.
Like actually fly, with wings.
On the wings of angels. Benjamin tells this tragic story about the Jews in Baghdad. 2 tricksters forged letters from Alroy that said, "On this specific night, we will all fly to Jerusalem. Give your property to us to distribute to the poor, and go up to your roofs and wait."
Oh no, I can see where this is going.
They called it the night of the flight. The entire community gives away their possessions and climbs onto their roofs. They wait. And they wait. Children are crying. The sun comes up. No flight. And the tricksters and all the property are long gone.
That is just heartbreaking.
It's the tragedy of false hope. But Alroy himself wasn't a scammer. He was a true believer in his own revolution. And that made him incredibly dangerous. The king of Persia threatened the exilarch in Baghdad. He said, "You stop this madman, or I will kill all the Jews in my empire."
So the official Jewish establishment had to take him out to save everyone else.
They tried to reason with him first. They sent letters saying, "Do not redeem us before the appointed time." Alroy ignored them. Finally, the governor of the region bribed Alroy's own father-in-law.
The betrayal comes from within the family.
The father-in-law went into Alroy's chamber while he was asleep and killed him. The rebellion collapsed instantly. Benjamin records this story in immense detail.
Why do you think he gives it so much space?
I think it's a warning. Benjamin is, at his core, a rationalist. He likes trade. He likes order. He likes established authority like the exilarch. Alroy represents chaos. He represents what happens when you let mysticism and fanaticism override political reality. It's a cautionary tale embedded right in the middle of the map.
We are in the final stretch of his journey now. Benjamin pushes the map to its absolute edge. He gets to India.
Kulam, it's likely the Malabar coast. And Benjamin is really struggling with the climate. He says the sun is so hot that men can't go outside during the day. All the markets operate at night by candlelight.
And the theology gets even more foreign to him, the sun worshippers.
The sons of Cush, he calls them. He describes their solar discs. He says they have these large, polished discs in their high places that catch the rising sun, and as the disc spins and reflects the light, they offer incense. He's likely describing Hindu rituals involving solar deities, but he interprets it very mechanically.
And then there are the fire worshippers.
But a place he calls Ibrig. This is likely a confusion of Zoroastrian communities, or perhaps Sati practices in India, the ritual immolation of widows. He describes self-immolation. He says the nobles vow to burn themselves. They throw themselves into a great fire while the community plays music and celebrates.
And then, just like he did in Hebron with the fake tombs, he spots the scam.
He does. He says that after the man burns, the priests will forge a return. They'll tell the family, "We saw your father in the spirit world. He is happy. He sends his love. And by the way, he says you should give us more money."
He is so cynical about the clergy of all faiths.
He sees the manipulation of grief for power everywhere he goes.
Finally, he mentions Xin, China.
He doesn't go there. He's listening to sailors in the ports of India now, and he records the story of the Sea of Nikpa.
The freezing sea.
Yes, a place where the star Orion supposedly causes such a storm that ships cannot move. They get stuck in the ice until their provisions run out and they all die.
And the only way out is the griffin.
The legendary griffin bird. The sailors take oxides, wrap themselves inside, and jump into the ocean. The griffin thinks they are cattle, so it swoops down, grabs the oxide in its talons, and carries it back to its nest on a mountain to eat it. The sailor then just cuts his way out of the hide and escapes.
It's incredible that a book that describes the exact number of glassmakers in Tyre and the tax policies of the Nile also includes flying griffin escape plans.
That's the medieval mind in a nutshell. There was no hard line between science and wonder. The world was big enough for both reliable trade routes and monsters.
He turns back. He passes through Egypt, describes the Nile flood and the Nilometer with perfect accuracy, and he returns to Europe. He dies in 1173, shortly after his return. So we have walked the map. We've seen the Pope, the Caliph, the assassin, the false messiah, the wind worshipper. What is the thinking deeper takeaway from all this?
For me, it all comes down to the network. We tend to think of globalization as this modern invention, the internet, airplanes. But Benjamin proves that a version of the internet existed in 1165.
The human internet.
Exactly. The protocol wasn't TCP/IP. It was the Hebrew language and the shared rabbinic tradition. Benjamin could walk into a city where he knew no one, find the synagogue, present his credentials or a letter of introduction, and he was instantly plugged in.
He had credit, he had housing, he had protection.
Instantly. It was a system that bypassed the borders of kings. The kings of France and England were fighting, the Caliph and the Crusader were fighting, but the network was operating underneath all that war. It allowed goods, information, and people to move right through the lines.
And the second thing, what's the other big takeaway?
The curiosity. Benjamin was a devout Jew, absolutely convinced that he possessed the ultimate truth. And yet he didn't look at the wind worshippers or the sun worshippers with hatred. He looked at them with fascination. He asked, how does this work? Who are they allied with? What are their customs?
He was an anthropologist, not an inquisitor.
In a world full of inquisitors, being an anthropologist is a truly radical act.
That is a great place to land. Benjamin's world was, in many ways, falling apart, but he found the threads that still held it together. He found that even in the godless wilderness, you could find an ally. And even in the enemy capital, you could find a trusted steward.
It's a lesson on looking closer, on seeing the network behind the noise.
In our fractured modern world, do we have anything that connects us as deeply as that medieval network? It's a provocative thought, but the most durable thing he found wasn't stone or magic. It was the letter of introduction. The ability for a man from Spain to walk into a house in India and be treated as a brother.
It makes you wonder what our most durable connection is today.
Go trace your own itinerary. Look for the network beneath the noise. Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.